What's up, everybody? I'm Orion Soldier Gus, and you're asking yourselves, who is this guy? So, if you don't speak in English, you definitely have no clue of who am I. But I'm a Brazilian podcaster. I do work for this podcast, Comer, Dormir, Jogar, which in English stands for Eat, Sleep, Play, as well as the cast Nintendista, which is a podcast. I work with the YouTube channel Nerd Nintendista, with my friend Leonardo Gaggioli. As well as a podcaster, I also happen to work as an English teacher. I do teach ESL for a Brazilian English school, as well as I teach it on my own. I tutor people through Skype lessons. So I was thinking, why not putting the two things I do, the two things I care about, together? Why not blending English learning with podcast, video games, and etc. So this is an extra episode of Comer, Dormir, Jogar. We will talk in English about how to learn this language with the use of games. So let's go, everybody. So, as a kid in Rio de Janeiro, when I grew up, I had my fair share of video games. My parents, they saw how much I liked this thing. As well as I was born and raised with my older brother here in Rio. He already had a few gaming experience as well, but he didn't set out to be a hardcore gamer as I am. Well, when we grew up, we had a Sega Master System. That was our first video game, especially because we had some cousins who also had the Sega Master System, and we could borrow a few games from them, which we came to have amazing gaming experiences, such as the Ghostbusters, Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Master System, as well as Super Soccer, Super Volleyball, Alien 3, etc., etc. However, the 8-bit generation doesn't have a depth in knowledge. You don't have this depth. You don't go really deep. The plot lines are mostly shallow. And it's not really difficult for a person who doesn't speak English fluently to play these kind of games, because all you gotta do is like jump, hit, dash, etc., etc. And those were pretty much the popular games that were sold out in the market, especially because the first RPG I played was Phantasy Star for the Sega Master System. However, here in Brazil, since the Sega Master System knew the official release by the company Tectoy, a Brazilian company, was in charge for distributing the Sega games and hardware as well, they were able to license a Brazilian translation, a Brazilian version that enabled us Brazilian players to experience this game in our language. So it was no longer a shallow game. However, it was in our language. I didn't learn English with this game. On the other hand, as I grew up, I was like becoming my teenage. That was the stage I had Sega Mega Drive. Here in Brazil, we call Sega Mega Drive. In North America, they refer to it as the Sega Genesis. And as well as a Mega Drive, I had my first portable video game, Nintendo Game Boy Classic, as well as I had a Nintendo Game Boy Color. And it was the time that came the first Pokemon Mania, and I was one of the people who were happy to play Pokemon Blue, the first generation, as well as Pokemon Gold, the second generation. So here we are talking about two games that they had content, they had English language, and at that time I didn't know ROMs and emulation, because with the rise of emulation and ROMs here in Brazil came to appear to show up ROMs of games that were originally in English or Japanese that were translated to Portuguese, but that's another thing. However, I had to play Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Gold, all in English, like choosing my decisions, learning with the game, flowing with the experience, etc., etc. But this didn't come to be as a big of a challenge, because at that time my dad decided to enroll me into an English school. He was like, okay, you love movies, you love games, so I'm gonna give you something that you're not only gonna like, but this is gonna be useful for your future. Learning this language will be something big. So he enrolled me, he paid for my English studies, which I actually came to realize how useful that would be with games, and how games affected the way I learned English, because it actually made me more motivated, made me more excited, made me more stimulated to go for English, go for this language that I didn't know, but it came to make me love more games for that. Just like I said, the first thing I noticed is that I no longer played shallow plot lines, shallow games that were like just this, like jump, shoot, go forward, go to the right, go to the left, hit. No, I was able to play RPG games. I was able to play games with a depth story, like a deep story that people would tell me, okay, this is going on. You're the guy who's gonna solve this problem, yada yada. So, as an English student, that came to motivate me, as well as with movies, because I was able to watch all the blockbusters that I loved. I was able to start binge watching series without relying down on being voiced in Portuguese. I was able to watch them totally in English, and I do remember how satisfying was watching like the first movie that I have ever watched in English with no subtitles. I still remember to this day. It was the Chronicles of Riddick. Yeah. I really loved that movie. It was like, yeah, I can follow the story, I totally get it, and it was amazing. As well as being able to play games such as Metal Gear Solid, the whole saga, Yakuza as well, pretty much as games as Black, which I had to spend like few hours listening to people talking English, etc., etc. Final Fantasy. There was no Final Fantasy in Portuguese. I had to go for it in English and listening to the voices of the Final Fantasy in English from Final Fantasy X to on. So, yeah, my gaming experience made me learn, made me love learning and studying English, which came to be something useful for the rest of my life, as well as learning English and studying it for a major purpose. To go on with this idea, I have here some tips, suggestions, ideas how to use English to your favor as an English learner, as an ESL learner, okay? First of all, if you want to go and start like without a big challenge, why don't you try like arcade games? Arcade shooters, as well as platform action, simple platform action, you know, the classic thing with Mario, Sonic, Crash, this kind of stuff. It's pretty much straightforward. Like it pretty much tells you, like, okay, do this, do that, jump, shoot, go to the platform, jump onto the enemy to hit it. So this kind of thing will not be a big challenge. It will be a moderate challenge, and as well as you train, like, listening to imperative sentences, as well as it will improve your vocabulary. Like, you will learn that shoot, push, pull, especially because some words are cognates in Portuguese, and this can cause a problem. Like, cognates may be false or true, so it will be a good experience to learn the difference between true or false cognates. The second level I would recommend of learning English through gaming is build basic and vocabulary with simulators, such as The Sims, Harvest Moon. So these simulation games, they revolve on simulating life, getting to a situation that it's closer to the real life, and how to make you improve and get used by day vocabulary, household items, situations in the city, situations in real life. So why not trying to get used to vocabulary used by day and routine situations that are regular, are constant and normal. So yeah, that would be the second tip, the second recommendation I would give of learning English with gaming. The level 3 that I would recommend is, why don't you try to go online and play with people? Why don't you try to interact? As a gamer, in my first episodes, and still this day, I defended in my podcast that the best games are played on multiplayer. So why not try to get online, play with a group of people? Why don't you try learning English, practicing your skills by meeting people online? Nowadays, every single game has this option of doing so. Not only the MMOs like Star Wars, The Old Republic, Star Trek Online, DC Universe Online. Every video game system nowadays, you can play Fortnite, you can try to play Brawlhalla, Paladins, and this is a way of getting to meet people, getting to put into practice the things that you speak, the things that you say. Why don't you try to go and chat, participate, join a different universe, and try something different? If you're still on the MMO thing, I would recommend Neverwinter for Dungeons and Dragons basic thing. The DC Universe Online is pretty much still a great game, and that's the thing. Go out there with your game, communicate with people, play with people from the other side of the world, especially ranked and online matches from other forms of game, like fighting games nowadays. That is this thing, and that is the party function of consoles, Discord, anything. You can get to know. The last level that I would recommend, dive into games with larger plots and deeper stories. The Telltale games are a great example of it, but especially because they count on decision-making processes, taking steps, etc., etc. But that's not the only type of game that revolves on that. Why don't you try, for example, the Arkham series from Batman, which pretty much you're not forced to make decisions in most of the games. However, you have to understand what's going on to go and proceed within the game, as well as RPGs like like I mentioned previously, the Final Fantasy saga, as well as the Witcher saga, which is like one of the best games made by far. Games with deeper plots, deeper stories, like God of War, Days Gone, Control, Quantum Break. These kind of games, they will revolve on, you gotta understand what's going on, you wanna understand what's going on to go and take some action. In a smaller scale, some games that I would recommend doing so. Pokemon, the saga. The most recent games are Pokemon Sword Shield, which by this year will come with 2 expansions. An expansion pass that will have the Isle of Armor and Thunder Crown. Okay? I know that Pokemon don't revolve much on spoken language, but still, there are no Pokemon games I know in my native language. In actually officially Pokemon games, they are not in Portuguese. Most of them, they are in English, Spanish, Japanese, Mandarin, traditional, etc. So why don't you give it a try? Try to explore this universe. And last but not least, a tip is that, especially for those who are Brazilians and have listened to Brazilian voiced games, why don't you try to listen to them in English? Okay? So right now, I'm not talking less of the Brazilian voice acting, which is amazing. I'm crazy for the Brazilian voice acting. I happen to know many Brazilian voice actors, and I'm a big fan. I'm a big time fan. But why don't you try to listen to it in English? Why don't you spot the differences? Why don't you spot the vocabulary and contextual situations? You may find a lot of funny things. You may find a lot of curious things as well as that some jokes, they do work only in Portuguese, and some jokes, some expressions, they do work only in English. I can pretty much give you an example with the Mortal Kombat 11. Both the versions, the original version in English and the Brazilian versions, are fantastic, are pure gold. In the Brazilian version, there is a joke revolving a Brazilian renowned TV host named Silvio Santos, that the character Johnny Cage, he impersonates him, and that is amazing. That was gold. I gotta say, I loved it. But there is a joke about Frost, the character Frost, the ice ninja, that everybody's calling her Elsa, and Cassie says, just let it go. That joke is only in Portuguese, in English actually. In Portuguese, you get to understand, but in English, it sounds way better. So, I'm not putting down Brazilian voice acting in games. I'm not putting down Brazilian voice acting. However, there are some things that you will not find if you don't try to look for them in English. Why don't you try? Why don't you take this step ahead? So, to sum up and finish this extra episode, I hope this is the first extra episode from many to come. The advantages of learning games through playing video games is that you get contextualization. You will find specific vocabulary, especially vocabulary that you don't usually see in movies, in TV series, songs. So yeah, it's like getting to a new universe. There is this immersive experience that it's different when you watch a story unfold and you don't have any participation in the process. You don't actually get yourself like feeling what's going on as an insider. In a game, you have this perspective like, okay, the plot is happening because my character is moving this world, is making this world coming to be, coming to act. So that is this thing, this when you put yourself into a perspective, this is easier. This is better. Okay? So that's it, people. My name is Orion Soldier Gus. You can pretty much find me on Instagram and Twitter by looking for @Orion Soldier GUS all together. And you can also try to look for my buddies, my partners. Léo Gagioli, the nerd Nintendista. You can find him on YouTube and Instagram. Natasha de Andrade from Diário Galáctico. She's a Brazilian YouTube booktube vlogger. I don't know the definition, but she's a booktuber. Yeah. And I do have a friend from the cast Nintendista named Alexandre Alves, aka Crap7. Not crap the food, Crap7. Yeah. He is on Twitch. You can find CREPE7. That's him. No mistake, okay? So, this is it, people. Thank you for listening to this podcast. This was an experimental thing, so I'm gonna sound very confused, but don't worry. If you're until here, I thank you very much for your patience and for your time. See you and play on!